I'm Brian Van from SportBikeTrackYou.com, and today we're going to install the Woodcraft Rearsets on our 2013 STG project bike. I chose to go with Woodcraft for a number of different reasons, okay? The products are developed and designed by a long-time motorcycle racer, Eric Wood. And the bottom line is, this stuff just really makes sense. He puts a lot of fine detail into these things that really make these parts the right choice for the racetrack. The kit we're putting on the R1, right? We have a cam adjustment system here, right? So you're able to, with the foot peg, you're able to adjust this foot peg into many different positions, okay? You can go further back, further forward, further down, further up. The nice part is you're able to match this from side to side easily because the holes are identical on each side. With the R1, we have 2 adjustment points on the frame to go up or down. They've also provided 2 holes here, so there's a lot of adjustment to go up or down as well. New foot peg. This is a new design that's making it to some of the Rearset kits now, okay? A little more aggressive knurling than before, and if you can see right here, Josh, there's also a cutaway that's built into this, a breakaway point, so if the motorcycle makes contact with the ground, the idea is for it to come apart there and do less damage to the Rearset or the motorcycle itself. Also, very intelligent design. We're going to put the folding toe pieces. This is currently an option, and the one for the shift side, right, offers, once again, adjustment, cam style, just like we showed you on the foot peg. So all in all, a shitload of adjustability with this Rearset kit. Tools that we need, very basic hand tools, right? We've got some Allens, okay, some wrenches, simple stuff. Instructions, very in-depth with the Woodcraft. As good as you're ever going to get from a set of Rearsets, as good as anything I've ever seen, maybe even more detailed. Follow these. And the other thing you're going to need is thread locker. Blue Loctite is going to work great for this. They call it out in the instructions. Every time you need to use it, they call it out. We're going to begin this project just by removing the shift side. Got this really cool Motion Pro T-handle. Love this tool. The way the R1 is set up, the shifter is independent of the footrest bracket itself. So it makes disassembly really easy. Now for the shifter, we're going to need to, per the instructions, I'm going to need to rotate the shift lever, okay, to get the GP shift. My preference is for reverse shift. So that's something that we're going to have to disassemble as well. Let's go ahead and break loose the rod. We need to be able to take all that apart. The mounting point here for the shift lever pivot. Some of the hardware we'll reuse, other pieces where you're not going to reuse it, they supply it in the kit, and once again, they call it out there for you. Very easy to follow. Come up here, and go ahead and take off the shift lever. Okay, we've got everything disassembled. Now, per the instructions, right, remember, I want to use GP shift. They want you to put the shift knuckle on at about the 4 o'clock position, okay? So we're going to slide that on there. I've got the Heim joint is being reused up here at the shift knuckle. They've supplied a new one down here that's going to attach to the pivot point for the shifter itself. Now we're going to go ahead and thread these together. Notice what I did here. These are obviously opposing threads, okay? What I like to do is I like to try and get them started together, okay? So that way they're threading in and out equally, and as you're going to make shifter adjustments, you're going to have a similar amount of thread inside this shift rod, as I think that's important. Now we need to get and mount this to the motorcycle. That is a pivot point. There is going to be friction there. So what I'm going to do, just to make sure that things are moving nice, because shifting is very important. You don't want to have to push on this shifter any harder than you need to. And by allowing there to be a bunch of friction, by leaving this dry, it could make the motorcycle a little less accurate to shift. So we're just going to go ahead and lube that up real quickly. Loctite here for sure. You can actually see the remnants of the blue Loctite that they had used from the factory. Go ahead and put some of that on the threads here, like so. Let's go ahead and grab this. Push that through. Grab our ski handle, throw some wrenches on the floor, and thread that in. This Motion Pro spinner handle, this thing's money. I love this tool. Definitely one of my go-to tools in the box now. There was a spring washer that was on this. We are leaving that on there. Go ahead and snug that up nice and tight. You can see we've got a nice, smooth action. Per the instructions, okay? They want you to leave the spacer on here, on the heim joint and the bolt, and they want you to use the uppermost hole. There is a nylock nut that's going to be installed on the back. Remember, the nylock nut, that is going to basically take the place of the Loctite. When you have the nylock nut on there, the nylon grabs onto the threads, right, and it's not going to come loose. So you will not need to put Loctite there. Let's go ahead and switch up Allen's. Snug this up. Anytime you put an adjustable set of rear sets on a motorcycle, right, you're going to begin with just a nice starting point. When I get this thing to the racetrack and I start to ride it, that's when I'm really going to dial it in. Okay, now we need to assemble their multi-piece shifter assembly. I love how they do this because everything's in individual pieces. You damage this, you can replace this, right? You damage this, you can replace that. Everything is independent of one another, and it makes repair a lot more affordable if in fact you do happen to fall off the motorcycle. Loctite on each one of these three is critical. You do not want these to come loose. Any kind of movement in this joint is going to result in poor shifting performance. Okay, so you want to make sure that you've got Loctite on here and you've got these all snug down. Once you service this the first time, there's really not going to be any need to pull this joint itself apart. Okay, 3mm Allen, we've got all of our Loctite on there. I even picked up the wrench I threw on the floor. They're also using a tapered fastener here. When you use a tapered fastener, you effectively increase the surface area where the fastener and the actual part come in contact. That increases the friction between the two, and it makes it far less likely that they're going to come loose. Snug these up, like so. I may actually follow that up with using a ratchet and a kind of a socket style hex, because I think I can get a little more torque on it than I got with this. I mean, that I'm sure is going to be fine, but I just want to make sure that that's going to be good to go. And remember, anytime you have multiple fasteners this close to one another, go over each one of them a couple of times, because the torque on one always influences the torque on the one next to it. Okay, now we're going to put the adjustable toe piece on the multi-part shift lever. It's important when you assemble this, okay, and I do have just a little bit of Loctite on here right now. It's important when you assemble this that you've done it in such a way that once you have this mounted up, right, that the breakaway is going to be in the right direction. So if you have it rotated wrong and the bike does fall down, it's not going to fold over. So you've got to make sure that the joint faces backwards. I've done that. There is a possibility down the road that we're going to need to adjust this as we go, okay? Go ahead and snug that up. Let's go ahead and take and get that on. I'm going to start off in just a standard straight back position, okay? From there, we're going to go ahead and make the necessary adjustments as we go. I'm just not sure what that's going to look like yet. Okay, I'm going to begin by mounting the foot peg to the actual footrest bracket itself. How I'm going to install this is I know I need more ground clearance on this motorcycle. That's a given, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin in the lower set of holes, and I'm going to take the foot peg and I'm going to leave myself some room for adjustment here. And I want to set the foot peg up so that it's as far back as possible. I've got kind of big feet, so it'll be nice to have some room in that area. And I want to try and keep, my weight more towards the back of the bike. So, a little bit of Loctite on this fastener. This is something you need to do before you put the footrest on the bike. A little bit easier to do it that way. We can get on there and adjust it if we need to down the road. But until we get to the racetrack and really ride this bike, I'm not going to know exactly where this stuff wants to be, or where I want it to be. I will, after all this, throw on a set of boots and be able to get a pretty darn good baseline. With this kit, we do have bolts supplied. Okay, they want you to use the bolts that are supplied with the kit. We've got a longer one that's going to go in the lower position because we've got a spacer to use there, and the shorter one, of course, will go up in the top. I put just a tickle of Loctite on there. Strong possibility at some point we're going to be in here taking this apart and putting it back together, and you know what, and that's okay. You got to commit to spending a few moments and getting your motorcycle ergonomically where you want it. It's one of the most important things that you can do. Don't just ride around the problems or the discomfort. Take a few minutes, do the work, and improve the situation. It really makes for a much more enjoyable experience on the motorcycle. We're using the second set of holes. Got the spacer in there. Go ahead and grab the T-handle. One size smaller on the Allen now. That's a 5. Go ahead and snug that up. Next thing I want to do, I'm going to put the pinch bolt back in the knuckle here for the shift shaft. I'm going to snug that up lightly right now. And then we will go over to the brake side and take care of that. All right, now we're on to the brake side. I'm going to begin by loosening up the rear master cylinder retainer bolts. Remember, the rear master bolts right to the footrest bracket itself. After that, I'm going to go ahead and break loose the master cylinder adjustment rod. This is just for the brake pedal travel, right? Odds are we're going to have to adjust that. Just going to get out front of that and loosen that up now because it's easier to do when everything's on the bike nice and tight. Pull these fasteners out. Brake light switch, okay? This is something that for a track bike, this makes no difference, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna unplug the stock brake light switch and we'll put that to the side with all the OEM parts that we're currently not using. For a street bike, if you wanna use these rear sets and you would like to retain the functionality of your rear brake light, all you have to do is purchase a brake light banjo switch. It's a pressure activated switch. It'll go right here, replacing this banjo bolt, hook up to the wires. It's only 2 wires to choose from, really simple to do. It'll hook up to the same wiring harness and you'll retain your brake light functionality for the rear. But for this particular case, that is not necessary. We're just gonna unplug it and put it to the side. Break the footrest loose. Fasteners off. Okay, I located the other end of the harness. It was just right over here on top of the engine. I was able to slide it out, unclip it, and then this was able to feed through the frame without a big issue. We're going to lose the ability to use this heat shield now, okay, because it was actually bolted to the back of the rear set. You know, it does look like this would shield your foot from a little bit of heat. This, I'm not really concerned about. This is the catalyst right here, but we're going to be changing this and installing the rest of the Graves Link exhaust system. We've got the slip-ons on right now. We're just waiting on the cat eliminator and the header pipe to do that. So that will address that issue moving forward. And I think riding it on the inaugural voyage here, I think we're going to be okay without doing that. So now you can see that we have this disconnected. We need this pivot bolt right here for the brake lever for the Woodcraft Rearsets, and we also need to disconnect the master cylinder joint. So what we're going to do that, is going to go ahead and take a pick. There is a really small cotter pin here. I'm going to go ahead and we want to reuse this. So you want to do a nice job taking this apart, right? You don't want to destroy it. These are pretty soft, and most oftentimes you can reuse these without really any issue. Kind of squeeze it together a little bit, and once you get it together, go ahead and start to pull. It'll come right out like so, and take the washer, take the pin, and here is the rear set. We just need to break loose this mounting point here. Depending upon how tight this is, you know, we may need to go over to the vise and use a ratchet, but I was able to get it, so we're going to go ahead and thread that off. This is just like what we showed you on the shift side. You're going to want to lubricate this for smooth brake application. You don't want any binding. You don't want it to take any more energy than necessary to make the controls on the bike. So we've got that out. Put the stock parts to the side, and now we're ready to put the motorcycle back together here on the brake side. All right, we've got all the stock stuff off, right? We remove the brake pivot bolt. We need to reuse that with the rear set kit from Woodcraft. So remember that. Don't just take your stock rear sets off and get rid of everything. You're going to need a couple of little pieces for the reinstallation. Brake lever. Just like the shift side, this is a multi-piece lever. So the first thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to begin getting this lever put together. Remember, Loctite. Each one of these 3 bolts. Blue thread locker is more than enough. You don't need a ton. And we do also have the benefit of having that tapered seat fastener, which really reduces the possibility of this coming loose. But still, you want to take the time to hedge your bet and prevent any unwanted loosening fasteners. Go ahead and get those 3 in there. And when you're done with this, remember, when you're done with the whole installation, chase back behind, and you want to go after these fasteners one more time, just to make sure that they are, in fact, snug. Do not want them loose. It's like we showed you on the other side. Anytime you have multiple fasteners right next to each other, it's always a good idea to go back and retorque each one a couple times, because the torque of the one next to it will have a bit of an influence on the other. Got that done. Let's go ahead and mount up our foot peg. Remember the position that we chose on the other side. We're going to want to stay consistent with that for both the foot peg and also the mounting point on the frame. A little bit of Loctite here. Eccentric cam, same spot. Get that threaded down in there. Let's go ahead and grab the T-handle. Snug that up. Once again, big tapered seat fastener, which is nice. Now, let's mount up the brake lever. Just like we did on the other side, I want to use just a little bit of grease on this. any of the contact points, you want to make sure they're well lubricated. Nice waterproof grease. That's a nice mobile one that we're using there. Good synthetic, high quality grease. A little Loctite on that as well. Let's go ahead and get our brake lever. Mounts in here like so. They also had a washer in place there. We're going to reinstall that. Oops. Wipe off some of the excess grease from the rear set. Double check the action, it's nice and smooth. We are, just like the other side, we're going to go ahead and use the awesome folding toe piece. Like we showed you before, it's critical that you line it up so the joint will be allowed to fold backwards in the event of a tip over. Okay, so you're going to be a little strategic here as you're putting that on. Just kind of get it. So it's going to be kind of in its position here, like so. Grab a 4, snug this up. You want that nice and tight because this one can't be adjusted, so it's not going to move from its position now. It's going to stay there. Now, master cylinder. We're going to reuse the stock mounting hardware here. Line it up, push the pin through. Got a washer, cotter pin. Okay, we've got the master cylinder pivot attached. I'm going to go ahead and put some thread locker on the actual footrest mounting bolts. Once again, we're using supplied fasteners here from Woodcraft. You're going to want to go ahead and put them in the same spot that you did on the other side. Okay, remember we've got our foot peg in the same spot. We want to make sure that these are in the same spot as well. Because once we have the entire motorcycle assembled, then we're going to want to go after this thing and get them dialed in so that I increase the chances that when I go to barber, I'm actually going to be able to jump right on this bike and ride it. Go ahead and snug those up with the T-handle. Like so. Now we need to put the master cylinder on, as well as the rear set heel guard. Okay, and they do have a couple of spacers they want us to use to space the master cylinder over. If you just bolt it up like so, it's going to put a little tension on that there. It's bending that. You don't want to do that. They have a couple of supplied spacers right here. We've got new bolts to use as well. Right here, as always, we'll put just a tickle of Loctite on these. These are going into the master cylinder. Probably a good idea if that stays tight. Don't use that rear brake much, but when you go off in the grass and you want it, it's a good thing if it's there. That top one started. What's cool about this kit too is they have a provision for mounting the rear brake reservoir. I've seen a couple other kits for this bike that did not address that, but Eric over at Woodcraft did address that. All that we have to do to make that happen is shorten this hose a little bit, and then they have some included hardware which should work quite nicely. Go ahead and snug that up. like so. Now here is the hardware that we're going to use to attach the rear brake reservoir. You can clearly see we've got way too much hose there, okay? So let's consult our instructions. It's going to give us an idea of how and where to cut it. I'm going to shorten that up. It looks like really all that we're going to retain is going to be, for the most part, just the 90-degree elbow, like so. So when you come back, we'll have this trimmed and we'll be mounting up the reservoir. Okay, I've already began adjusting the rear sets. The first thing I noticed was when I got on the bike, I felt like I had the pegs up too high. So I lowered them one step in the frame mounting bracket, okay? I like what I have there. Now it's time to dial in the toe pieces for the shifter and the brake. On the shift side, I started to do that, and remember, we had the ability to adjust this toe piece, rotate it around. After looking at that for a few minutes and making some initial adjustments, I determined that I wouldn't need to use that eccentric cam for myself. So I removed that from the equation, and now I have the toe piece fastened only to the shift lever. The distance for me is just right. Now what I need to do is just get this dialed in. That's a little lower than I want it. I'm going to go ahead and rotate the shift rod. That feels like a good spot. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that up, and that will give me my shift side adjustment. Okay, now onto the brake side. You know, this isn't super critical, right? I don't really use this a lot. What I'm looking for is I don't want it too high so that when I do go to use it, I feel like I can modulate it nicely, and honestly, I think that spot right there is going to work out great. So now I'm ready to snug up the master cylinder rod adjustment as well as the shift rod. Okay, the rear sets are all adjusted. I've already snugged everything up on the brake side, including this step. Remember I said I just want to chase these 3 fasteners here before that Loctite's dry with a standard style Allen wrench. Felt like I had a lot of flex out of that long T-handle 3mm. Those all feel good and even. Now, all we have to do here is make sure that we've got the jam nuts tight. When I tighten these jam nuts, one of the things I'm going to look to do is make sure that each of these heim joints is running parallel with the shift knuckle as well as the shift pivot. You don't want those fighting each other or binding in any way. This really isn't that difficult to do. We've got our backup wrench, right? Got our 10 mil for the jam nut, snug that up. You can see I rolled the protective boot out of the way here so I could see the uppermost one. Got reverse threads down here on the bottom. Go ahead and hold that. Like so. Go ahead and turn the shift rod. It's moving nice and free. Everything looks good. Go ahead and put the protective boot back over the uppermost heim joint. When you're done, go through and check everything. Check all your fasteners. I'm going to double check this and make sure that that is folding in the right direction. I've already done that on the other side. All in all, what do I think of this kit of rear sets? I chose it for a reason because I think this is one of the best pieces available, all things considered. The intelligent design, it's got a lot of things built into this that really just make a lot of sense for being on the racetrack. Beyond that, the components can all be replaced individually. Sourcing the parts is super easy. We keep a good amount in stock here. If they're not here, we can get it from Woodcraft really fast. It's a great kit of rear sets. I'm pumped to have them on the bike. I'm Brian Van, sportbiketrackgear.com. This is the Woodcraft Rearset install on the STG Project Bike.